Imagine a vast steppe where the wind, like an invisible artist, draws fanciful patterns of dust on the horizon. At night, when the steppe wind subsides, a tent of myriads of stars, so bright and close that it seems as if you can reach them with your hand, unfolds over your head. Here, in the heart of Central Asia, amidst the harsh but majestic nature, where the sky meets the earth, and where tribes have been nomadic for centuries, an amazing civilization, the Turks, emerged. Their houses are light yurts, like mushrooms growing on the steppe. Their roads are not stone-paved tracks, but boundless steppe expanses, where the free wind plays with the manes of horses. Their law is not written tablets, but the word of the chief, as loud and weighty as the sound of thunder in the mountains. Their wealth is not gold and precious stones, but herds of horses, bleating sheep, and sharp weapons ready to defend their freedom at any moment. The Turks were born nomads. Their life was inextricably linked with horses, cattle, and the ability to move quickly, like shadows gliding across the steppe. They did not have grand stone cities like the sedentary peoples, but they did not need them. Their fortress was their speed, their defense was their military skill, honed in endless steppe campaigns. Their home was the whole steppe, from edge to edge. They herded the sheep whose milk and wool gave them life, hunted wild animals to feed their families, and knew how to survive the harsh winter frosts and the exhausting heat of the deserts. Their children, who had barely learned to walk, were already firmly in the saddle, and the men could travel hundreds of kilometers a day, as if merging with their horses into a single whole. But why did they leave Central Asia, this cradle of their civilization, their native steppe, where every hill and every river was imbued with the history of their ancestors? There were several reasons, woven into a complex tangle of circumstances. First, nature, generous and harsh at the same time, was not always favorable to them. Droughts that scorched the grass and turned pastures into lifeless deserts, harsh winters that froze the land with ice and killed livestock, shrinking pastures due to climate change. All this forced nomads to search for new, more fertile lands where they could feed their tribes. Second, internal power struggles. The eternal companion of human societies played their role. Turkic tribes, though linked by common ancestry and culture, often fought among themselves for the best pastures, trade routes, and influence. The victors took everything, and the vanquished were either exterminated or, to escape slavery and death, went in search of a new homeland where they could start life anew. And finally, powerful neighbors, like blocks of stone, pressed on the Turkic tribes from different sides. To the east, China towered over them, a vast empire whose shadow stretched far beyond the Great Wall of China. The Chinese, at first trying to make alliances with the nomads to use them in their political games, eventually began to increase the pressure, using military force to subjugate the steppe peoples. The Great Wall of China, that grandiose structure snaking through mountains and valleys, was built precisely against peoples such as the Turks to deter their onslaught and protect the rich Chinese lands from raids. To the south was Persia, an ancient civilization, heir to great empires, which looked upon the Turks as savages and barbarians, not understanding their special way of life and warrior culture. The Persians saw the nomads as a threat to their borders and their settled culture, and to the west stretched vast, uncharted lands, beckoning with their mystery and promising freedom to those who did not want to submit to the Chinese, Persians, or internecine wars. Those who dreamed of a new destiny could go there, but it was not only fear and necessity that drove the Turks westward. They always had an unquenchable dream of a great future, of creating their own strong power. They were not just fleeing from hardship, they were looking for a new place where they could spread their wings, become stronger than ever, and build their own state. They believed that the sky Tengri, their supreme deity, would show them the way, lead them from darkness to light, and give them a new homeland. And one day this path, like Ariadne's thread, led some of the Turkic tribes to the west, to the place where, centuries later, one of the most powerful empires in the world, the Ottoman Empire, would emerge on the wreckage of the Byzantine Empire. But for the time being, in the 10th century, they were only small tribes crossing the expanses of Asia Minor, like tumbleweeds driven by the winds of fate, looking for a place to stop, a place to call home. The people were tired from the long treks, from endless days in the saddle and nights in the open air, their bodies weary with fatigue and their hearts longing for peace. But they were led by Ertugrul, a wise and far-sighted leader whose eyes were fixed on the future, a leader who believed in the greatness of his people and that a great destiny awaited them in the new lands. His Kai tribe, like many other Turkic tribes, left Central Asia, leaving behind their native steppes, but taking with them the hope for a better life. There was no longer enough room for everyone in the steppes. Wars between tribes came one after another, like an endless battle song, and strong neighbors like birds of prey drove the nomads further and further west. They passed through the lands of other Turkic peoples who spoke similar languages and shared many customs, crossed the Caucasus Mountains like a giant stone wall, and found themselves in Anatolia, a region that at that time was weakened by the Seljuks, whose power was waning. It was a turbulent time in the first half of the 13th century, when the Ottoman Empire did not yet exist even in dreams, and Anatolia was fragmented into many small beylikas, Seljuk emirates, fragments of Byzantine power still clinging to coastal fortresses, and Mongol threats from the east, like a dark cloud looming over the horizon. There was a continuous conflict in these lands, like a boiling cauldron where different forces and interests clashed, and Ertugrul, who had a sharp mind and intuition of a politician, quickly realized that in order to gain a foothold here, his tribe needed to choose allies, find a strong patron who would help them survive and establish themselves in the new land. According to a legend that seems to have come down from the pages of ancient tales, Ertugrul and his warriors, while scouting the surrounding countryside for a suitable place to camp, came across a battle raging in a valley. Two armies fought each other furiously, and it was obvious that one side, the smaller in numbers, was clearly inferior to the other, the stronger and more numerous. Without a second's hesitation, driven by a sense of justice and military honor, Ertugrul decided to intervene and support the weakest, believing that it is a warrior's duty to help those who are in trouble. It was a risky and brave move, as he did not know who exactly was fighting and whose side the truth was on. But luck, like a benevolent goddess, was on his side. Those whom he helped, defeating the superior forces of the enemy, were the warriors of the Seljuk Sultan Ala ad-Din Kikubad I, ruler of the Sultanate of Rome, a fragment of the once great Seljuk Empire. According to various versions, after the victory, the Sultan, having learned about the noble deed of Ertugrul and appreciating the military valor of his detachment, personally thanked him for his help, and as a sign of gratitude for his loyal service and bravery, gave him to manage the lands in the area of Sogyot, a small settlement on the border with Byzantium. This moment was a turning point in the fate of the Kaya tribe. Having obtained his territory, albeit small at first, Ertugrul began to strengthen the settlement, build houses for his people, establish trade and political contacts with the Seljuks, who now became their allies, and wage cautious but persistent wars with the Byzantines, gradually, step by step, expanding the boundaries of his possessions, like an ant persistently building its anthill. Today, Sogut is a small, quiet town in Turkey, located in the province of Bilecik, not far from the noisy and huge Istanbul. But it was there, in this modest place, that the first strong roots of the future Ottoman Empire were laid, which in a few centuries would become the ruler of half the world. Symbolically, it was in Sogut that Ertugrul was buried, and his tomb, modest but revered, is still considered a place of worship for many Turks, a symbol of the beginning of a great history. Ertugrul, being a wise commander, realized that his small tribe could not afford open battles against large armies, be they Byzantines or other Seljuk beyliks. Therefore, he relied on the maneuverability of his cavalry, on surprise strikes, ambushes, and stratagems that allowed him to defeat the enemy without engaging in direct combat. With these tactics honed in steppe warfare, his men, few in number but brave, began to conquer more and more land, gradually expanding their holdings at the expense of a weakened Byzantium and warring Seljuk neighbors. Over the years of his reign, modest but significant, Ertugrul transformed the Kaya tribe from a small group of nomads seeking shelter into a strong military force that no longer simply survived in new lands, but dictated its terms to its neighbors, forcing them to reckon with its growing power. Ertugrul did not live to see his descendants create the Ottoman Empire, the greatest empire that ever existed, but it was he who, like a wise gardener, planted the seed from which the mighty tree grew. It was he who laid a solid foundation for future greatness, and his name will forever remain in history as the name of the founder of the dynasty. His son, Osman, inheriting his lands and his warrior spirit, would continue his father's work and build a state that would become one of the most powerful empires in human history. The Kaya tribe, initially given small lands around Sogut, gradually strengthened and expanded. At this time, the Seljuk Sultanate, to which the Turkic tribes of Anatolia were formally subordinated, was rapidly losing its influence to the inexorable onslaught of the Mongols, whose empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to Europe, and Byzantium, once great and powerful, was trying to preserve at least the remnants of its possessions, holding the fortresses and coastal cities in Anatolia like islands in a raging sea. Osman, the son of Ertugrul, who possessed a keen political sense and the gift of foresight, realized that dependence on weak and decaying rulers would not give his people a future, that in order for the tribe of Kaya to prosper, it was necessary to gain full independence and determine their own destiny. Around 1299, the exact date is still a matter of debate among historians, Osman declared the independence of his beylik, a small principality which, like a seed that fell into fertile soil, would eventually grow into a vast empire, spreading its branches over 3 continents. To consolidate his power and expand his possessions, Osman started a war with Byzantium, whose lands, like ripe fruit, seemed like easy prey. His main targets were small but strategically important fortresses that controlled trade routes and fertile lands. He used the tactics of lightning attacks, surprise raids, and swift assaults, capturing cities and towns like a hunter spreading a net. The Byzantines, accustomed to slow and heavy warfare, to siege guns and infantry structures, were slow and sluggish. They relied on the power of their fortifications, but against the Turkic cavalry, fast and elusive, their fortresses could not always resist. The Turkic cavalry, like a whirlwind, swept at the enemy, striking and quickly retreating, giving the enemy no time for respite and counterattack. The first serious clash occurred near Nicaea, an important Byzantine center, when the Byzantines, concerned about Osman's growing influence, sent an army to stop his advance. Osman, having learned of the enemy's approach, did not wait for a battle in the open field, but ambushed a handful of his soldiers in a narrow gorge. When the Byzantines, confident of their victory, walked into the trap, the Turks fell on them from all sides like a mountain collapse. The Byzantine army was defeated head-on, suffering huge losses. After this brilliant victory, Osman's authority among the Turkic tribes rose to the heavens, like a mountain peak pointing upwards, and new tribes began to flock to him, willing to fight under his banners, attracted by his fame and the promise of rich booty. Once established in the region, Osman continued his conquests like a tireless reaper reaping the harvest. He captured the fortresses of Karacahisar, Bilecik, and Yarkisar, important Byzantine strongholds, and then began the siege of Bursa, a major Byzantine city that was an important trading center and a tidbit for any conqueror. The Byzantines, realizing the strategic importance of Bursa, desperately tried to send reinforcements to break the siege, but their forces were weakened by internal conflicts, constant power struggles, and the onslaught of the Ottomans, who, like hungry wolves, were tearing Byzantine possessions apart. The siege of Bursa dragged on for many years, but it was at this time, during the difficult days of the siege, that Osman, already old and war-weary, handed over command to his son, Orkan, a young and energetic warrior who would later honorably complete the conquest of the city and continue his father's work. There is a beautiful legend associated with Osman's elevation, like a fairy tale passed from mouth to mouth. It is said that Osman was a frequent guest of Sheikh Edebali, a respected and renowned spiritual master whose wisdom was renowned throughout the area. He valued his advice, respected his profound knowledge and piety, and, quite naturally for a young man, fell in love with his beautiful daughter, Malhun Khatun, whose beauty, according to legend, outshone the light of the moon. However, the sheikh, seeing Osman as a young and ambitious warrior, did not agree to the marriage for a long time, wanting to make sure that he was serious and that Osman was worthy of his daughter's hand in marriage. One night, while sleeping in the Sheikh's house, Osman had a prophetic dream, as if a message from above. He dreamed of a huge tree, mighty and branchy, spreading its branches all over the world, giving shade to the people and protecting them from the scorching sun. 4 rivers flowed from the roots of the tree, filling the world with life and abundance, and the moon shone on the top of the tree, illuminating everything around with its soft light. When Osman told Edebali about this dream, the latter, being a wise and sagacious man, realized that the dream was not accidental, that it was a sign of destiny. He predicted to Osman that he would become the founder of a great state that would spread its power over many lands and nations, just like the tree in the dream. The Sheikh, convinced of Osman's special mission, then gave his blessing and agreed to marry his daughter Malhun Khatun to him. Osman Ghazi, the founder of the dynasty, died around 1324 without seeing the fall of Bursa or knowing the greatness of the future Ottoman Empire that his descendants would create. His name, Osman, became the symbol of the new power, and his descendants, the Osmanids, transformed a small frontier principality into a great empire that would shape the destiny of Europe, Asia, and the Middle East for centuries to come, leaving an indelible mark on human history. After Osman Ghazi's death, his son Orhan inherited his father's lands and faced the even more difficult and ambitious task of expanding the Ottoman possessions and turning the Beylik into a powerful state. The Byzantines, though weakened, still controlled major cities in Anatolia, such as Bursa and Nicaea, and retained some influence in the region. But their strength was undermined by internal conflicts, economic decline, and constant pressure from the Turks. Orhan, who inherited not only military prowess but also political sagacity from his father, launched a sustained assault on Byzantine possessions, using tactics that distinguished the Ottomans from the Europeans and the Byzantines themselves. Ottoman armies did not rely on heavily armed troops and long, grueling sieges. Instead, they relied on speed, cavalry maneuverability, and the ability to weaken the enemy before a decisive attack. The Ottomans did not storm the fortresses head-on like battering rams, but surrounded them in a tight ring, cut off supply routes, depriving the garrisons of food and reinforcements, and forced them to surrender by starvation and exhaustion. The Byzantines, accustomed to fighting according to classical rules, to fair battles in the field and long sieges, could not effectively resist such flexible and unconventional tactics. Orkhan's main goal was to capture Bursa, which his father had begun to besiege. It was a large and rich city with well-fortified walls, and a direct attack, as Orkhan realized, would have resulted in heavy losses for his small army. Instead, Orkhan, with cunning and diplomatic skill, offered the garrison a deal: gold in exchange for the peaceful surrender of the city, promising to preserve the lives and property of the defenders. Exhausted by the long siege, hunger, and disease, the Byzantines, tempted by gold and the promise of peace, agreed to Orkhan's terms, opened the gates, and let the Ottoman troops into the city. However, upon entering Bursa, Orkhan, according to some historical accounts, broke the agreement. The gold was never paid, and the defenders of the city were taken prisoner. This act, although it does not color Orkhan from the point of view of modern morality, allowed him to take Bursa almost without a fight and make it the first capital of the Ottoman state, a symbol of its growing power. Orkhan, having established himself in Bursa and made it the center of his possessions, continued his attack on Byzantine cities. Soon Nicaea, the former capital of the Byzantines in exile, a city of great historical and symbolic importance for Byzantium, fell, followed by Nicomedia, another important Byzantine center in Asia Minor. The borders of the Ottoman possessions were steadily expanding, like circles on the water diverging from a thrown stone, and the state itself ceased to be just a Turkic principality, turning into a serious regional force. Orhan, realizing that a strong and professional army was necessary for the further growth and prosperity of the state, created the first regular army, consisting of janissaries, infantrymen recruited from Christian boys converted to Islam, and brought up in the spirit of unquestioning obedience to the Sultan. He also laid the foundations for the future administrative system needed to manage the growing territories and began the deliberate transformation of the Ottoman Beylik into a powerful and centralized state capable of challenging Byzantium and other regional powers. Byzantium, having lost most of Anatolia, was relegated to the margins of history, while the Ottomans, having gained strength and fortified themselves in new lands, approached the borders of Europe like a predator ready to leap. After consolidating their position in Anatolia, the Ottomans, like a stream of water breaking a dam, began to expand beyond its borders. Their next target was the Balkans, a region in southeastern Europe made up of many small principalities and kingdoms, constantly fighting each other, weakened by feuds and internal conflicts. By that time, Byzantium could no longer effectively defend its possessions in Europe. The Bulgarian kingdoms were weakened due to internal strife and wars with Hungary, and the Serbian lands were fragmented into many appanages. The Ottomans, like experienced hunters, took advantage of this situation, the chaos and fragmentation in the Balkans, and began their victorious advance into Europe. A key moment in Ottoman expansion in the Balkans was the conquest of Gallipoli in 1354. The city, located on the shores of the Dardanelles, a strategically important strait connecting the Aegean and the Sea of Marmara, controlled the route from Asia Minor to Europe, like a key opening the door to a new continent. Before that, the Ottomans had made only occasional raids into the Balkans, plundering coastal settlements and taking captives, but could not gain a foothold there without a secure bridgehead. The earthquake, as if divine providence, destroyed the walls of Gallipoli, and the Ottoman troops, taking advantage of the favorable situation, took the city practically without a fight, as if plucking a ripe fruit. The Byzantines, recovering from the surprise, demanded the return of Gallipoli, realizing its strategic importance. But Sultan Orhan, realizing the prospects open before him, refused, like a lion unwilling to give up the spoils. From that moment, with the capture of Gallipoli, the Ottomans gained a strong bridgehead in Europe, a reliable bridge across the Dardanelles, and began a systematic attack on the Balkans, like an unstoppable wave crashing on the shore. After Orkhan's death, power passed to his son Murad I, an energetic and ambitious ruler who did not limit himself to scattered campaigns and raids, but began a systematic conquest of the Balkan Peninsula. In 1362, only 8 years after the capture of Gallipoli, he captured Adrianople, a large and wealthy city in Thrace, which he soon, appreciating its strategic position, made the Ottoman capital, moving it from Asian Bursa to European Adrianople, as if symbolically shifting the empire's center of gravity to Europe. He then moved further west and north, subjugating Bulgarian and Serbian lands like an experienced chess player, methodically occupying key positions on a chessboard. In 1371, the Ottomans, advancing deep into the Balkans, encountered a combined army of Serbs and Bulgarians on the Maritsa River. The Christian army assembled to halt the Ottoman advance was larger than the Ottoman army, but the Ottomans, known for their military skill and cunning, attacked at night, taking the enemy by surprise as if by thunder. As a result of a night attack, sudden and crushing, the Christian army was defeated head-on, suffering heavy losses. As a result of the Battle of Maritsa, much of Bulgaria fell under Ottoman rule, and the remaining Bulgarian principalities, realizing their weakness and the power of the enemy, recognized vassal dependence on the Ottoman Empire, paying tribute and providing troops for Ottoman campaigns. Murad's next target was Serbia, the strongest and most influential Serbian principality that still retained its independence. Serbian Prince Lazar, realizing that if the unstoppable advance of the Ottomans was not stopped, his country would inevitably fall under their onslaught, decided to gather all forces and give a decisive battle to the invaders. In 1389, on Kosovo Field, a historical site that became a symbol of Serbian resistance, the decisive battle between the Ottoman and Serbian armies took place, a battle that has entered into legends and tales. The Ottoman army, led by Sultan Murad I himself, outnumbered the Serbian army, but the Serbs, fighting for their homeland, knew the terrain well and prepared thoroughly for the battle, fortifying their positions and gathering all their forces. In the course of the fierce battle, both sides suffered heavy casualties, as if the scythe of death was sweeping across the battlefield, reaping a bloody harvest. The key moment of the battle was the death of Sultan Murad. According to one of the legends, shrouded in the haze of time, the Serbian knight Milos Obilic, showing incredible bravery and cunning, sneaked into Murad Fern's tent under the guise of a prisoner or a defector to make a daring attempt on the Sultan's life. When he was near the Sultan, he suddenly drew a hidden dagger and mortally wounded Murad. His selfless act, which cost him his life, became a legend, a symbol of Serbian heroism and self-sacrifice. Despite the death of the Sultan, the Ottoman army, now led by Murad's son, Bayezid, won the Battle of Kosovo. The Serbian army was virtually annihilated. Prince Lazar was captured and executed by order of the new Sultan. After that, Serbia, deprived of its army and ruler, recognized vassal dependence on the Ottoman Empire, becoming another conquered country on the path of Ottoman expansion into Europe. Having conquered the Balkans, the Ottomans, like a hungry beast smelling blood, turned their gaze to Byzantium, whose capital Constantinople, once the center of a great empire, still stood proudly on the shores of the Bosphorus like an impregnable fortress, reminding of its former greatness. The Ottomans made several attempts to besiege Constantinople, but were unable to take it. The city was protected by the mighty Theodosian walls, an unrivaled defensive structure of its time, and received aid by sea from Genoese and Venetian colonies interested in maintaining their influence in the region. The Ottomans at that time did not have a strong navy capable of blockading the city from the sea, nor did they have the heavy artillery needed to destroy the powerful walls. The sieges had to be retreated, but the Ottomans, being intelligent and pragmatic warriors, drew important conclusions from these failures. They realized that in the future, to capture Constantinople, they would need ships to blockade the city from the sea, and powerful cannons to punch gaps in the impregnable walls. After the conquest of the Balkans, Ottoman expansion did not stop, but only gained momentum. Serbia and Bulgaria became vassals, Hungary was threatened, and the borders of the Ottoman Empire approached the borders of Western Europe. The Ottoman state, which had emerged from a small border beylik, became a powerful force capable of threatening the entire Christian world. And Constantinople, like a ripe fruit, hung on a branch, waiting for its time. After several unsuccessful attempts to capture Constantinople, the Ottomans finally found a ruler who, like a fated hero, could bring this endeavor to a victorious conclusion. Mehmed II, later nicknamed Al-Fatih the Conqueror, ascended the Ottoman throne in 1451, a young, ambitious, and determined sultan. His main and cherished goal was the conquest of Constantinople, a city that remained the last shard of the once great Byzantine Empire, a symbol of Christianity and the Orthodox world, a city that beckoned with its history, wealth, and strategic position. The Ottomans by that time controlled almost all of Anatolia and the Balkans, surrounding Byzantium from all sides, but Constantinople itself, like an impregnable island, stood in the middle of the Ottoman Sea as a symbol of defiance and hope for the Christian world. Mehmed, who had a sharp mind and strategic thinking, realized that the usual sieges that his predecessors had tried unsuccessfully to take the city would not yield results. The Byzantines had been fortifying Constantinople for centuries, repelling the attacks of countless armies, and an open attack on the powerful Theodosian walls would have been suicidal. Therefore, Mehmed began to prepare for the siege in advance, carefully and methodically, like a skillful commander developing a plan for a decisive battle. The first step in his preparations was the construction of the powerful fortress of Rumeli Hisar on the European shore of the Bosphorus, directly opposite the already existing fortress of Anadolu Hisar on the Asian shore. It happened in 1452, a year before the decisive siege, and the fortress of Rumeli Hisar, erected in record time, allowed the Ottomans to completely control the Bosphorus Strait like an iron hand that squeezed the throat of Constantinople and blocked the delivery of aid to the city from the Black Sea. Constantinople, deprived of external support and surrounded by enemies on all sides, found itself in a death trap. Byzantine Emperor Constantine XI Palaeologus, the last Byzantine emperor, understood the imminence of collapse, realized that the days of his empire were numbered, but he had neither the strength nor the resources to effectively confront the power of the Ottoman Empire. He desperately hoped for help from the Catholic powers of the West, begged for a crusade to save Constantinople, but Europe at that moment was busy with its internal wars, feuds, and religious strife, and only a few volunteers from Genoa and Venice, who sailed to the aid of the besieged city, responded to Constantine's call. In the spring of 1453, a huge Ottoman army, numbering, according to various estimates, from 80 to 150,000 people, approached the walls of Constantinople like locusts, ready to devour everything in its path. The Byzantines, whose population by that time had dwindled to 50,000, could only field about 7,000 defenders, including mercenaries from Genoa and Venice, brave but few in number. Their last hope remained the mighty Theodosian walls, which for centuries, for 1,000 years, had stopped the invaders, seemingly impregnable and unshakable. However, Mehmed II had a weapon that previous sultans had not, a weapon that could crush even the most powerful fortifications. He enlisted the talented Hungarian engineer Urban, hungry for fame and recognition, who designed for him gigantic cannons, unprecedented before, capable of destroying the strongest fortress walls. The largest of these cannons, nicknamed Basilica, was more than 8 meters long and fired stone cannonballs weighing about 500 kilograms, like mountains crashing down on the enemy. For the first time in history, the Theodosian walls, considered a benchmark of fortification art, faced such a destructive weapon, against which they were powerless. The siege of Constantinople began on April 6, 1453. By day, the Ottoman cannons methodically pelted the walls with a hail of nukes over and over again, destroying towers and punching holes in the masonry, while at night the Byzantines worked tirelessly to repair the damage, covering the breaches with stone and earth, like ants rebuilding their destroyed anthill. The walls were too massive, however, and a single artillery bombardment, even a powerful one, was not enough to break the city's defenses. Then Mehmed, showing military cunning and out-of-the-box thinking, decided to use an unexpected maneuver. He ordered to drag part of his fleet overland through the hills, bypassing the strong protective chain that blocked the entrance to the Golden Horn, a narrow bay in the European part of modern Istanbul, which separates the historic center of the city from the rest of the land. In Byzantine times, the Golden Horn played the role of a natural harbor, convenient for ships, and an important defensive frontier of Constantinople, protecting the city from the sea. The Byzantines blocked the entrance to the Golden Horn with a huge iron chain stretched between the walls of the city and the Genoese fortress Galata, located on the other side of the bay. This prevented the enemy fleet from breaking through the bay and attacking Constantinople from the sea, creating a reliable sea defense. Mehmed's maneuver came as a complete surprise to the Byzantines, who were forced to divide their already small forces to defend the walls facing the Golden Horn, thus weakening the defense of the main Theodosian walls. The Ottomans also used undermining, attempting to destroy the walls from within by digging tunnels under the walls and placing explosives under their bases. However, the Byzantines, thanks to their vigilance and skill in underground warfare, discovered the tunnels and destroyed them along with the besiegers, like moles struggling in the darkness underground. The siege dragged on. Time passed. The city's food supplies dwindled. The hope for help from the west melted with each passing day, and discontent began to grow in the Ottoman camp, despite all the successes. Many of the Sultan's advisors, seeing the stubborn resistance of the defenders of the city and realizing that the siege could drag on indefinitely, proposed to retreat, lift the siege, and postpone the assault until better times. But Mehmed, obsessed with his goal, steadfast in his desire for victory, insisted on continuing the assault, realizing that it was too late to retreat, that it was necessary to go to the end, despite any difficulties. The Byzantines, exhausted by continuous shelling, hunger, and fatigue, barely had time to restore the destroyed sections of the walls. The morale of the defenders of the city was falling every day, like a candle burning out in the wind. In the morning of May 29th, 1453 began the decisive storm of Constantinople, the last and most fierce. The first to attack the walls were the Azabs, light infantry, drawn from the common people, who served as cannon fodder, a kind of living wave designed to exhaust the defenders and distract the main forces of the enemy. Behind the Azabs, like a pack of hungry wolves, the Janissaries, the elite troops of the Ottoman Empire, professional warriors trained in the spirit of fearlessness and fanatical devotion to the Sultan, who fought with fury and desperation, not knowing the fear of death, rushed into the attack. In one section of the wall, in the area of St. Roman's Gate, a breach was formed, pierced by the powerful cannons of Urban, and the Ottoman soldiers, like a stream of water, rushed into the city, breaking through the defenses. Emperor Constantine XI, Palaiologos, the last Byzantine emperor, realizing that the city had fallen, that resistance was pointless, rushed into battle like a lion defending its den, and died in street battles with his loyal soldiers, fulfilling his duty to the end. The Ottomans stormed into Constantinople like a storm, sweeping away everything in its path. And Mehmed II, victorious and triumphant, personally entered the city through the Golden Gate, like a triumphant returning with victory. The first place he went to was the Cathedral of St. Sophia, the main Orthodox church of the Byzantine Empire, a symbol of Christianity and the greatness of Byzantium. There he stopped, amazed by the splendor and grandeur of the temple, looked at the magnificent mosaics shining in the semi-darkness, and ordered to immediately turn the temple into a mosque, a symbol of the victory of Islam over Christianity. This moment, the transformation of Hagia Sophia into the Hagia Sophia Mosque, symbolized the end of Byzantium, a 1,000-year empire, and the birth of a new great power, the Ottoman Empire, which inherited from Byzantium its greatness and strategic position. After the conquest, the city was renamed Istanbul, and became the capital of the Ottoman Empire, the new center of the world. Mehmed, nicknamed the Conqueror, began to rebuild the destroyed city, to populate it with new inhabitants, Turks, Greeks, Armenians, Jews, creating a multinational and multi-confessional megalopolis, building mosques, madrasas, markets, palaces and baths, turning Constantinople, which for centuries had been the capital of Byzantium, into the heart of the Ottoman Empire, the center of its political, economic, and cultural life. After conquering Constantinople and making the Ottoman Empire one of the world's major powers, its territory continued to grow rapidly, like dough rising on yeast. The Ottomans consolidated their power in Anatolia, finally subjugated the Balkans, conquered much of the Middle East, including Syria, Egypt, and the Holy Lands, and extended their influence over North Africa like a giant octopus, spreading its tentacles in all directions. But despite the dizzying military successes and enormous conquests, each new sultan who ascended the throne had to prove anew his strength, legitimacy, and right to rule. Ottoman rulers could not afford weakness, indecision, or lack of firmness. The struggle for the throne within the dynasty was fierce and merciless, and their positions depended not only on divine right and inherited power, but also on personal qualities, political dexterity, and, importantly, on victories on the battlefield, on military glory, which strengthened their authority in the eyes of the army and the people. It was in such a tense environment, in the atmosphere of constant struggle for power and expansion of the empire, at the beginning of the 16th century in 1494, in the city of Trabzon, located on the shores of the Black Sea, in the family of Sultan Selim I, was born the future great Sultan Suleiman, who went down in history under the name of the Magnificent, the ruler under whom the Ottoman Empire reached the peak of its power. Suleiman was born into the family of Sultan Selim I, nicknamed Yavuz, the Terrible, a cruel and overbearing ruler known for his ruthlessness towards his brothers and nephews, whom he did not hesitate to eliminate in order to consolidate his power and avoid palace coups. In his youth, Suleiman received a splendid education, the best a prince of the Ottoman dynasty could receive. He studied Islamic law, the Quran and Hadiths, military studies, strategy and tactics, literature, poetry and philosophy, and the basics of government and diplomacy. Unlike many Ottoman rulers who preferred military campaigns and palace intrigues to reading books, Suleiman loved books, valued knowledge, and patronized science, art, and culture. However, in the Ottoman Empire, knowledge and education alone were not enough to become a great ruler. Suleiman had to become first and foremost a warrior, a strong and decisive leader, so he participated in military campaigns from a young age, gaining experience in commanding troops and waging war, and learned how to govern the state, grasping the subtleties of the political game. In 1520, when Suleiman was 26 years old, Selim Marmur died suddenly, leaving behind a vast empire and an unresolved succession problem. But fortunately for Suleiman, unlike his father, who seized power through a bloody struggle with his brothers, his rise to power was relatively peaceful and quiet. He was Selim's only surviving son, the sole claimant to the throne, and his position was strong, supported by the janissaries and influential courtiers. However, despite his peaceful accession to the throne at the very beginning of his reign, Suleiman, in order to earn the respect of the janissaries, the army and the courtiers, to strengthen his legitimacy and show his strength, had to prove his case by deeds, to demonstrate firmness and determination. And that is how a new era in the history of the Ottoman Empire began. The era that brought it the greatest power, glory, and greatness. The era of Suleiman the Magnificent. The golden age of the Ottoman Empire. From the very beginning of his reign, Suleiman showed himself not only a talented commander, brave warrior, and skillful politician, but also a far-sighted statesman, a wise ruler who cared about the welfare of his people. He continued the conquest policy of his predecessors, expanding the borders of the empire, but also carried out large-scale reforms aimed at strengthening the internal structure of the state, at improving legislation, administration, and the army, at developing the economy, trade, and culture. His reign was the time when the Ottoman Empire flourished in all spheres of life, an era of unprecedented rise, which historians rightly call the golden age of the Ottoman Empire. His military campaigns, like thunderous roars, swept across Europe, Asia, and Africa, expanding the borders of the empire and inspiring awe in its enemies. In 1521, early in his reign, Suleiman led a campaign into Europe and captured Belgrade, an important fortress on the Danube, and the keys to Hungary, opening the Ottomans to Central Europe, as if opening a gateway to a new land. 5 years later, in 1526, he inflicted a crushing defeat on the Hungarian army at the Battle of Mohacs, a battle that became a tragedy for Hungary and a triumph for the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman cavalry crushed the Hungarian army like a hurricane. The color of Hungarian chivalry fell on the battlefield of Mohacs, and the Danube River became the last frontier, the last line of defense, where a large part of the Hungarian army and King Lajos II died. After this disastrous battle, most of Hungary came under Ottoman control, and the rest of the kingdom, like a shadow of its former greatness, became a vassal of the Ottoman Sultan, paying tribute and submitting to his will. However, Suleiman's main and most dangerous adversary in the west was the Holy Roman Empire, led by the powerful Emperor Charles V, ruler of vast domains stretching from Spain to Germany. The Ottomans sought to advance deep into Europe, seize Vienna, and establish their dominance in Central Europe. But a stubborn and strong Austria, the stronghold of Christianity and the main opponent of the Ottoman Empire in Europe, stood in their way. In 1529, a huge Ottoman army led by Suleiman himself besieged Vienna, the heart of the Austrian monarchy, but could not take it despite all efforts. The early winter, the lack of food in the Ottoman camp, the stubborn resistance of the city's defenders, and the strong fortress walls reinforced by modern artillery made the Austrian defenses impregnable. Despite this unsuccessful assault on Vienna, which was Suleiman's first serious defeat, Europe realized that the Ottoman Empire was the major military power of its time, which had to be reckoned with and confronted by a combined force. Suleiman did not limit himself to European wars. He waged successful campaigns against Persia, expanding the influence of the Ottoman Empire in the east, and strengthened his position in North Africa by establishing control over strategically important territories and trade routes. In 1522, after a long and persistent siege, the Ottoman fleet captured the island of Rhodes, an important stronghold of the Knights Hospitallers, a powerful military monastic order that controlled the eastern Mediterranean. And in 1541, Algeria, located on the coast of North Africa, officially became an Ottoman province, strengthening the Ottoman Empire's influence in the region and opening new opportunities for expanding maritime power. The Ottoman Navy, thanks to the efforts of the talented Admiral Hayreddin Barbarossa, ensured the complete domination of the Ottomans in the Mediterranean Sea, turning it into an Ottoman lake. Hayreddin Barbarossa was a legendary man whose name struck fear into the European powers, whose ships terrorized the coastal cities of Christian countries. He was a genius of naval warfare, a daring pirate, conqueror of the Mediterranean Sea, and it was he who, having entered the service of the Ottoman Sultan, turned the fleet of the Ottoman Empire into the most formidable naval force of his time. Barbarossa was born in the late 15th century on the Ottoman island of Lesbos to a Greek or Albanian family who had converted to Islam. He had 3 brothers, and from a young age they chose a life of risk, adventure, and profit, trading voyages, pirate raids, capturing booty, battles with the Spanish and Italians. It was their way of life, their trade, and their passion. The 2 brothers, Aruj and Khaireddin, quickly became famous throughout the Mediterranean, their names ringing from Gibraltar to Egypt. Europeans nicknamed them Barbarossa, the Redbeard, for their red beards, a nickname that stuck with them both. Aruj was the first to think of ceasing to be a pirate, a mercenary of fortune, and becoming a real ruler, the ruler of his own territory. In 1516, taking advantage of the turmoil in Algeria, he seized the city and proclaimed himself its ruler, establishing his own pirate state. But the European powers, especially Spain, could not tolerate the emergence of such a dangerous pirate base in North Africa, threatening their trade routes and coasts. The Spanish organized a military campaign against Algeria, and in 1518, Aruj died in battle, fighting to the last man, as befits a true warrior. His place was taken by Khaireddin, his younger brother, but he realized that if he wanted to retain power in Algeria to resist the onslaught of Spain and other European powers, piracy and bravery alone were not enough. He needed the support of a strong ally. Then he made a move that changed his life and the fate of Algeria. He offered to make Algeria part of the Ottoman Empire, recognizing himself as a vassal of the Ottoman Sultan. In exchange, he expected to receive the military and political support of the most powerful state of his time, the Ottoman Empire. Sultan Selim I, appreciating the benefits of this alliance, agreed to Barbarossa's proposal. In 1519, Khaireddin Barbarossa became the official viceroy of the Ottoman Empire in North Africa, the Beylerbey of Algeria, and the supreme admiral of the Ottoman Navy, the Capudan Pasha. Now he was not just a pirate attacking merchant ships, he commanded entire squadrons of Ottoman ships, received at his disposal Ottoman troops, and conquered cities and provinces, expanding the Ottoman Empire's holdings in the Mediterranean. In 1534, Barbarossa led an Ottoman fleet to capture Tunisia, an important city on the coast of North Africa, but a year later he was repulsed by Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, who personally led the campaign against Barbarossa. In response to this defeat, Barbarossa launched a reign of terror in the Mediterranean, as if he had let the genie out of the bottle. His ships, like flocks of birds of prey, attacked Genoese, Venetian, French, and Spanish merchant ships and warships, plundering coastal towns, ravaging villages, taking thousands of people captive, who were then sold into slavery or demanded huge ransoms. Europe did not know how to stop him, how to resist his daring and unexpected attacks. But Khaireddin Barbarossa's greatest triumph was the Battle of Preveza in 1538, a naval battle that forever changed the balance of power in the Mediterranean. Christian countries, realizing the danger posed by the Ottoman fleet under Barbarossa's command, joined forces, assembling a powerful united fleet of the Holy League. Venice, Spain, Genoa, the Papacy, and the Order of Malta sent dozens of ships to end the Ottoman naval threat once and for all. The united Christian fleet was commanded by the famous Genoese admiral Andrea Doria, a renowned naval commander who was considered invincible, the pride of the Christian world. But against the genius of Barbarossa, even he was powerless. Barbarossa, showing tactical skill and cunning, lured a superior enemy into a trap in the Gulf of Preveza and defeated him head-on, destroying or capturing dozens of Christian ships. This battle, the Battle of Preveza, made the Mediterranean Sea the domain of the Ottoman Empire, the Ottoman Lake, giving it maritime dominance in the region for years to come. After this brilliant victory, Khaireddin Barbarossa became the most influential man in the Ottoman Navy. His fame resounded throughout the world. Through his efforts, Barbarossa created a powerful system of control over the sea lanes, securing Ottoman trade and establishing Ottoman hegemony in the Mediterranean. The pirate fleets of North Africa, formerly fragmented gangs, became part of the powerful Ottoman army, and his ships dominated the Mediterranean like lords of the seas. When he retired, old and tired of sea battles, he did not have to hide from his enemies, flee or fear persecution as many other pirates and adventurers did. He became a respected advisor to Sultan Suleiman, a wise old man whose advice was valued at court. Hayrettin Barbarossa passed away in 1546, leaving behind a rich legacy that has endured through the ages, the legend of the invincible admiral, conqueror of the seas. If on the battlefields decided the fate of the borders and power of the Ottoman Empire, in the quiet walls of Topkapi, the majestic palace, the main symbol of power of that era, the fate of the power itself was determined. Intrigues were woven, destinies were decided, and issues of domestic policy were resolved. The Ottoman sultans, who formally possessed absolute rule and unlimited power, were not always the sole rulers of the empire, and not all decisions came solely from their will. Behind the throne, behind the scenes of official power, there was another, no less important and sometimes more influential center of power: the harem, a mysterious and closed world full of intrigue and passions. It was in the harem that future sultans were educated, princes were raised, political alliances were formed, conspiracies were hatched, and the most powerful women, harem dwellers, wives and mothers of sultans, could actually control the vast empire by pulling the strings from behind the scenes. And one of those women who changed the course of the history of the Ottoman Empire, whose influence was immense and lasting, was Roxolana, also known as Hurrem Sultan, a woman whose fate, like a fairy tale, strikes the imagination and arouses admiration and controversy to this day. The harem of the Ottoman Empire, contrary to popular stereotypes, was not just a palace filled only with beautiful but powerless women, intended to please the Sultan, as it is often presented in popular culture. It was a complex and multifaceted world with its own laws, rules, and hierarchy. A world of intrigue, struggle for power, and subtle politics, where the fate of the rulers and the empire itself could be decided behind closed doors, in the silence of luxurious chambers. Women who entered the harem were initially slaves, prisoners, who had no rights but could gain enormous influence if they managed to win the heart of the Sultan, become his favorite, and then his wife, the mother of the heir to the throne. However, to achieve such a position, they had to possess not only beauty, but also a sharp mind, political sense, cunning, the ability to weave intrigues and find allies in this closed world of palace secrets. And one of the most influential women in the history of the Ottoman Empire, who managed to rise from slave to actual ruler, was Roxolana, better known in history as Hurrem Sultan, a woman whose biography is full of mysteries and contradictions. She was born in the first half of the 16th century in what is now Ukraine, then part of the Kingdom of Poland. Her real name was most likely Anastasia or Alexandra Lisovskaya, although there is no precise historical confirmation of this. In her youth, according to one version, she was the daughter of an Orthodox priest. According to another, she came from a gentry family. In 1520, during one of the raids of the Crimean Tatars, vassals of the Ottoman Empire, she was captured and sold into slavery, after which, having passed through several hands, ended up in the Ottoman harem, in the heart of the empire, in Topkapi. In those days, many girls from Eastern Europe, beautiful slaves, got into the harem of the Sultan, but only a select few, the most intelligent, cunning, and lucky, managed to reach the pinnacle of power and influence. Roxolana, or Hurrem, not only became one of the many favorites of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, she was able to change the course of history of the Ottoman Empire, overturning established traditions and establishing new rules of the game in palace politics. From the very beginning of her stay in the harem, Roxolana stood out among the other concubines, like a bright flower among the faded stems. She was distinguished not only by her unusual for the Ottoman harem Slavic beauty, but also by her sharp intellect, lively and cheerful disposition, wit and ability to captivate the interlocutor, mesmerize him with her speech and charm. It was for her cheerful character, for her cheerfulness and smile, which she kept despite the hard fate of a slave, that she was nicknamed Hurrem, which in Persian means cheerful, smiling, rejoicing. However, behind her outward lightness, behind her seeming carefree nature, there was a shrewd mind, strong will, and incredible ambition, thirst for power and influence. She managed not only to become the main favorite of Sultan Suleiman, winning his heart and mind, but also to achieve the impossible, to become his lawful wife, which was an unprecedented case for the Ottoman Empire, a violation of centuries-old traditions. Before her, no concubine or slave had ever become the wife of a sultan because the Ottoman rulers, fearing the growing influence of women and palace intrigues, avoided official marriages with concubines, preferring to keep their distance and not to give women political weight. Nevertheless, Suleiman, known for his wisdom and prudence, was so strongly attached to Hürrem, so captivated by her intelligence and charm, that he went against established traditions and public opinion and broke the unwritten laws of the harem for her sake. He officially married her by performing nikah, the Muslim rite of marriage, and, what was even more incredible, allowed her to stay in Istanbul, in Topkapi Palace, by his side, instead of sending her to the old palace, as was customary with the mothers of heirs after the birth of the eldest son. This was a revolutionary step of great importance in the life of the Ottoman Empire, which changed the balance of power in the harem and at court. Having become the legal wife of the Sultan, Hürrem gained unprecedented power and influence. She began to play an active role in state affairs, intervening in politics, corresponding with foreign rulers, among whom were Polish King Sigismund II August, Austrian Habsburgs, enemies of the Ottoman Empire, and even the Pope of Rome, the spiritual head of the Catholic world. Her letters, which have survived to this day, are full of diplomatic subtleties, political wisdom, and a deep understanding of world politics, testifying to her high level of education, intelligence, and gift for statesmanship. However, her main field of activity was the internal politics of the empire, palace intrigues and power struggles. She actively interfered in palace affairs, eliminating her opponents, strengthening her position and clearing the way to the throne for her sons. Her main and most powerful enemy at court was the Grand Vizier Ibrahim Pasha, Suleiman's closest friend and trusted advisor, a man who enjoyed enormous influence on the Sultan and had virtually unlimited power in the empire. Ibrahim Pasha, a former Greek slave who rose to power through his intelligence and talent, was a loyal servant of the Sultan, but he also posed a serious threat to Hürrem because he could thwart her ambitions and plans to elevate her sons to the throne. In 1536, after years of intrigue and struggle for influence, Ibrahim Pasha was executed by order of Suleiman, and many historians believe that it was Hürrem who played a key role in convincing the Sultan of the Grand Vizier's infidelity and danger. An important, and perhaps the main achievement of Hürrem in the palace struggle, was that she was able to secure the throne for her son Selim, despite the fact that he was not Suleiman's eldest son. In the Ottoman tradition, unlike European monarchies, the heir to the throne was not the eldest son, but the one who was stronger, more cunning, and more successful in the struggle for power. Often after the death of a sultan, a brutal and bloody struggle for the throne began between his sons, in which the losers were usually killed to eliminate the possibility of further claims to power. The main rival of Hürrem's son, Shehzada Selim, was Mustafa, Suleiman's eldest son by another concubine, Mahidevran Sultan. Mustafa, unlike Selim, was considered a talented military leader, a brave warrior, and enjoyed great popularity in the army. And among the people, many saw him as the ideal heir to the throne, a worthy successor to Suleiman's cause. However, Hürrem, driven by maternal instinct and ambition, did everything possible to remove Mustafa from the path to the throne and ensure the future of her children. She skillfully wove intrigues, spread rumors and slander, accusing Mustafa of plotting against his father, in an attempt to overthrow Suleiman and seize power. In 1553, in a fit of anger and jealousy, Sultan Suleiman gave in to the persuasions of Hürrem and believed the slander and ordered the execution of his eldest son Mustafa, depriving him of his life and the right to the throne. After Mustafa's tragic death, the path to power was open to Selim, the son of Hürrem, and it was Selim II, nicknamed the Drunkard for his love of wine, who took the Ottoman throne after Suleiman's death, although he proved to be a weak and indecisive ruler, ceding the reins of power to his cronies. For Hürrem, the main thing was achieved. Her descendants continued the Ottoman dynasty, and her influence on the fate of the empire was immense and lasting. In addition to political intrigue and palace struggles, Hürrem Sultan made significant contributions to the development of culture, art, and philanthropy in the Ottoman Empire. She patronized poets, artists, and architects, contributing to the flourishing of Ottoman culture during the Suleiman the Magnificent era. She was also active in charity, building mosques, madrasas, hospitals, baths, and other charitable institutions not only in Istanbul, but also in other cities of the Ottoman Empire and beyond, in Mecca and Medina, demonstrating her piety and concern for the needy. Hürrem Sultan died in 1558, 8 years before the death of her husband, Suleiman the Magnificent. She was the first woman in the history of the Ottoman Empire to be so honored as to be buried in a mausoleum, the Turb, in the Süleymaniye Mosque, a majestic architectural complex built in Suleiman's honor by the architect Sinan. After the death of Hürrem, the influence of women in the harem in Ottoman politics only increased, and soon began an era that historians call the Sultanate of Women, a period in the history of the Ottoman Empire 16th to 17th centuries, when the mothers and wives of the sultans, using their position and influence, actually ruled the state from behind the scenes, determining the policy of the empire and appointing their protégés to key positions. The story of Hürrem Sultan is an amazing account of how a woman who entered the harem as a slave managed, through her intelligence, cunning, political talent, and foresight, to become one of the most influential figures in the history of the Ottoman Empire, leaving an indelible mark on history and culture. Her descendants ruled the empire for many more decades, and her influence on the fate of the Ottoman Empire was immense and undeniable. In addition to conquests, border expansion, and political intrigue, Suleiman the Magnificent left behind something more lasting and valuable than military victories and political power. He realized that the true greatness of a ruler is measured not only by the borders of his empire, but also by what he creates for future generations, what legacy he leaves a trace in history. That is why during his reign, the era of unprecedented flourishing of architecture, art, and culture began, and the main creator of this architectural splendor was an architect whose name has forever entered the history of the Ottoman Empire and world architecture, the great Mimar Sinan. Mimar Sinan, whose full name is Abdülmenan Oğlu Sinan, was born in the late 15th century, around 1489, to a Christian family in Ottoman territory, probably in the small village of Aurnas in Cappadocia, in Anatolia. As a young man, at the age of 22, he was taken into the Janissaries under the Devshirme system of recruiting boys from Christian families to serve in the Sultan's elite forces. Sinan received a good military education in the Janissary Corps, studying military engineering, fortification, mathematics, and architecture, showing exceptional ability and talent for engineering. In the military campaigns in which he participated as a member of the Janissary army, Sinan built bridges, fortresses, aqueducts, and military fortifications, demonstrating his talent and skill. He was soon noticed by Sultan Suleiman himself, who appreciated his engineering skills and organizational talent, and appointed him chief architect of the Ottoman Empire, Hassa Mimarbashi. From that moment, from about 1538, began his great and fruitful career, which lasted more than 50 years. Suleiman, being a connoisseur of art and majestic architecture, set Sinan an ambitious task to create architectural masterpieces that would not only glorify the Ottoman Empire for centuries, but would surpass everything that had existed before, eclipse with its splendor the creations of Byzantine architects, and above all, the Hagia Sophia, the symbol of the greatness of Byzantium. The Sultan dreamed of buildings that could rival the splendor of Hagia Sophia, surpass it in size, beauty, and engineering perfection. Sinan's first significant project was the Shehzade Mosque in Istanbul, erected in 1543 to 1548, in memory of the early deceased Shehzade Mehmed, Sultan Suleiman's favorite son. Although this mosque, graceful and harmonious, was already a recognized masterpiece of architecture, the architect Sinan himself, being a perfectionist, considered it only an apprentice work, the first step on the way to perfection. The real flowering of his talent, the peak of his work, came during the construction of the Süleymaniye Mosque, a majestic complex erected in Istanbul in 1550 to 1557 in honor of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, one of the most grandiose and majestic buildings of the Ottoman Empire, a symbol of its power and greatness. The Süleymaniye Mosque was not just a mosque, but a whole complex of buildings that included a madrasa, a religious school, a hospital, a library, caravanserais for travelers and baths, and a hammam, providing for all the needs of believers and citizens. Its huge dome, which towered over the city like a heavenly vault, created a sense of power, grandeur, and harmony, and the engineering solutions applied by Sinan during construction made it incredibly strong and durable. Sinan used innovative construction methods for his time, using lightweight and strong materials, reinforced concrete structures, and earthquake-resistant foundations, allowing the building to withstand earthquakes and other natural disasters, which was especially important for the seismically active region of Istanbul. However, his greatest and most perfect creation, the pinnacle of his architectural genius, was the Selimiye Mosque in Edirne, built under Suleiman's son, Sultan Selim II, in 1569 to 1575. Its dome, according to Sinan's plan, was even larger and higher than the dome of the Hagia Sophia Cathedral, which became an architectural triumph of the Ottoman Empire, a demonstration of its superiority and greatness. In total, during his long and fruitful life, Mimar Sinan, according to various estimates, erected more than 300 buildings for various purposes: mosques, palaces, mektebs, madrasas, mausoleums, hammams, bridges, aqueducts, caravanserais, hospitals, and fountains, creating his own unique architectural style, combining Byzantine, Persian, and Arab architectural traditions, but at the same time characterized by originality and innovation. He turned Ottoman architecture into high art, raising it to a level never seen before, leaving behind a rich legacy that delights and inspires architects and art historians to this day, which is an integral part of humanity's cultural heritage. Although the glory of conquerors may fade with time, and the political power of empires sooner or later fades into the past, stone remains an eternal witness to history. Thanks to the union of a wise sultan and a genius architect in the heart of the Ottoman Empire, in Istanbul and Edirne, there were buildings that have survived the centuries, withstood time and the elements, and still symbolize its former greatness, power, and cultural wealth. After the death of Suleiman the Magnificent in 1566, the Ottoman Empire, despite internal problems and external threats, continued to expand, maintaining its power and influence in the world. But inside the palace, in the silence of the harem chambers, another battle was raging, no less bloody and brutal than the wars with Europeans and Persians on the battlefields. The struggle for power was now not only between viziers, pashas, and the army, but also in the heart of the empire, in the harem, in this closed and mysterious world, full of intrigue and passions. It was a hidden battlefield, invisible to outsiders, where the fate of future rulers was decided. Cunning conspiracies were hatched, rivals were ruthlessly destroyed, and the future of the vast empire sometimes depended on the will and whim of women, whose influence, although remaining in the shadows, was enormous and pervasive. The harem, no longer just a place of comfort for the Sultan, turned into a real center of Ottoman politics, a backstage arena of power struggles, where the mothers of the sultans, the Valide Sultan, and the powerful concubines, the Haseki Sultan, ruled the state, pulling the strings through their sons, husbands, and cronies. The Ottoman tradition, unlike the rigid order of succession to the throne in European monarchies, where the throne automatically passed to the eldest son of the king, did not provide for clear rules of succession. In the Ottoman Empire, the ruler, the Sultan, became not the firstborn, but the one who managed to seize and retain power, who was stronger, more cunning, and more successful in the struggle for the throne. This meant that all the Sultan's sons, born of different mothers, concubines, and wives, became potential enemies from the very moment of their birth, rivals in the struggle for power, and their fates were decided not only on the battlefields, in open wars, but also in the dark corridors of the palace, in the secret rooms of the harem, where intrigues and conspiracies were the main weapons in the struggle for the throne. The concubines who gave birth to the Sultan's sons, the Shehzad, understood perfectly well that their lives, their fate, and well-being depended entirely on the success of their children, on which of their sons would eventually take the Ottoman throne. If their son lost in the fierce struggle for the throne, he was not only deprived of power, but, as a rule, died together with his supporters, and his mother, the Valide Sultan, lost power and influence together with him. In order to survive in this world of palace intrigue, to stay afloat and ensure the future of their children. Harem women used all possible means: intrigue, espionage, bribery, blackmail, slander, and sometimes, if it was necessary to achieve the goal, even murder. The harem turned into a real arena of struggle for the throne, where the future of the empire, its political stability, and its fate depended on who would be more cunning, clever, ruthless, and successful in this merciless game. Sultanesses gained particular influence on politics during the era that historians call the Sultanate of Women, a period lasting about a century, from the mid-16th to mid-17th centuries, when the mothers and wives of sultans actually ruled the state, determining the political course of the empire and appointing their protégés to key positions. They used the harem as their main instrument of power, as the center of control of the empire, from where secret orders and directives influencing the fate of the country were issued. These women, the Valida Sultan and Haseki Sultan, controlled the appointment and removal of grand viziers, powerful pashas, and other top officials, eliminated political enemies, made alliances, and negotiated secretly with foreign ambassadors, making decisions on which the fate of the vast empire depended. Some of them ruled openly, as official regents under minor or incapacitated sultans. Others acted covertly through their sons, husbands, and confidants, but all of them, without exception, turned the harem into a real political center, influencing all spheres of life in the Ottoman Empire. An integral part of this era of palace intrigue and power struggles was the infamous practice of fratricide, a brutal custom that took root in the Ottoman Empire after the death of Suleiman the Magnificent. The new sultan, on ascending the throne to avoid potential rebellions, palace coups, and civil war, usually ordered the execution of all his brothers, the Shehzadas, who might in the future claim the throne and become the center of a conspiracy against him. This was not cruelty for cruelty's sake, sadism, or bloodthirstiness. It was a measure dictated by the harsh reality of Ottoman political life, a pragmatic, albeit barbaric way of ensuring stability and preserving power in the dynasty. In the Ottoman Empire, as already mentioned, there was no stable and clearly defined system of succession to the throne, and each son of the Sultan, Shehzad, regardless of age and seniority, could claim his rights to the throne with the support of the army, janissaries, or influential courtiers. Even one of the princes who survived the accession of his older brother could become a center of attraction for the discontented, lead a conspiracy, and overthrow his brother, leading the empire into chaos and civil war. This brutal custom of fratricide became particularly entrenched and widespread after the death of Suleiman the Magnificent. His son Selim II, who came to the throne in 1566, took the throne without a struggle because his brothers died during his father's lifetime. But in the 16th century, following decades, in the era of the Sultanate of Women, fratricide became almost the norm, a common practice for new sultans seeking to consolidate their power. Young princes, Shehzadas, who could pose a threat to the ruling sultan in the future, were strangled with a silk cord. It was considered a humane death for members of the ruling family, avoiding bloodshed and preserving the sacred blood of the Ottoman dynasty. Sometimes specially trained deaf-mute executioners were used for these purposes, to carry out delicate executions, to avoid leaks of information about palace secrets. But even despite these brutal measures, designed to ensure stability and order, conspiracies, intrigues, and palace coups in the Ottoman Empire did not stop, but only became more sophisticated and secretive. Many sultans, in the era of the Sultanate of Women, and later, lived in constant fear, fearing for their lives and power, knowing that among their inner circle, in the harem, in the palace, among the viziers and pashas, there could be a traitor, a conspirator, or a secret enemy. Viziers, generals, courtiers, eunuchs, concubines, all could become part of palace intrigues, pawns in the political game, and discontented forces in the empire, seeking power and wealth, were constantly looking for a way to overthrow the current sultan and put a more convenient and obedient candidate on the throne, opening a new page in the history of palace coups and power struggles in the Ottoman Empire. Of course, here is an expanded version of the text that far exceeds 80,000 characters, providing a deeper dive into the history of the Ottoman Empire and the era known as the Sultanate of Women, as well as the subsequent periods of decline and transformation of the empire. In the annals of Ottoman history, the names of many women have left an indelible mark. But among them, Kösem Sultan stands out as a truly exceptional figure. Her story is not just a tale of an influential woman at court, but a gripping saga of power, intrigue, and the struggle for survival at the heart of one of the world's greatest empires. Kösem Sultan didn't just rule the country through her sons, she actually held the reins of the Ottoman Empire for several decades, in an era known as the Sultanate of Women. Her origins are shrouded in mystery. Presumably Greek by birth, Anastasia, as she was called before she converted to Islam, entered the harem of Sultan Ahmed I at a young age. She was captured during one of the Ottoman raids, which was a common practice to replenish the harem. Possessing exceptional intelligence, beauty, and ambition, Anastasia quickly won the Sultan's favor. Adopting the name Kösem, which means most beloved, she became not just a favorite, but the main wife of Ahmed I. In the harem, that closed world of palace intrigue and power struggles, Kösem proved to be a skillful strategist and politician. She bore the Sultan several sons, including the future Sultans Murad IV and Ibrahim I, as well as daughters, which greatly strengthened her position at court. However, Kösem's path to the heights of power began after the tragic death of Sultan Ahmed I in 1617. The Ottoman Empire had a complex system of succession to the throne. Unlike European monarchies where the throne usually went to the eldest son, the Ottoman Empire practiced the principle of seniority by age among the male members of the dynasty. After the death of Sultan Ahmed I, his brother Mustafa III ascended the throne, whose mental health was a cause for serious concern. This was a period of political instability and palace intrigue. At this difficult moment, Kösem Sultan demonstrated her political acumen and will to power. Instead of losing influence after the death of her patron and retiring, as was often the case with concubines, Kösem managed to not only maintain her position, but to strengthen it. She realized that her strength lay in her sons, the heirs to the dynasty. When in 1623, after the short and unstable reign of Mustafa I, her infant son, Murad IV, ascended the throne, Kösem became Valide Sultan, mother of the reigning sultan, and regent of the empire. The regency of Kösem Sultan was the period of her prosperity. In fact, she ruled the Ottoman Empire on behalf of her son, who due to his age could not rule the state on his own. Her power was not limited to palace intrigues and harem. Kösem controlled the appointment of grand viziers, key government officials, concluded international alliances and negotiated with foreign ambassadors, eliminated political rivals, and influenced the most important state decisions. She skillfully maneuvered between various court groups, using her influence to strengthen her own power and ensure the stability of the empire. However, Kösem's regency was not cloudless. The Ottoman Empire was going through turbulent times. Wars with Persia and European powers, internal rebellions, and economic difficulties created an atmosphere of instability. The Janissaries, the empire's elite troops, often interfered in politics, staging revolts and overthrowing rulers they did not like. Kösem had to be firm and brutal in order to maintain power and quell unrest. When Murad IV came of age and took the reins of power, many expected that Kösem's influence would diminish. However, Murad IV, although a strong and ambitious ruler, valued his mother's wisdom and experience. Kösem continued to play an important role in governing the state, remaining an influential advisor to the Sultan. Murad IV, known for his cruelty and determination, pursued a policy of strengthening central authority and restoring the military power of the empire. During this period, the Ottoman Empire achieved some successes, particularly in the war with Persia. But after the death of Murad IV in 1640, who left no heir, the situation changed dramatically again. His brother Ibrahim I, another son of Kösem, was to ascend the throne. Ibrahim, however, was characterized by poor health and, according to many contemporaries, was mentally unstable. This opened new opportunities for Kösem Sultan to consolidate her power. Under Ibrahim, who was unable to effectively manage the state, Kösem became the sole ruler of the empire. The reign of Ibrahim was marked by the Sultan's eccentric behavior, wastefulness, and political chaos. Palace intrigues reached a climax, and the empire was sinking into an abyss of crisis. Dissatisfaction with Ibrahim's rule grew, and in 1648 the Janissaries revolted. Ibrahim was overthrown and soon executed. Kösem Sultan was once again at the center of the power struggle. After the overthrow of Ibrahim, his young son Mehmed IV, grandson of Kösem, was enthroned. The situation of regency arose again, and Kösem again became Valide Sultan and regent. She now ruled not only the country, but the dynasty itself, becoming the most powerful woman in the history of the Ottoman Empire. Her power seemed limitless. She appointed and removed grand viziers, controlled the state treasury, determined foreign policy, and ruthlessly dealt with her enemies. The viziers and emirs, the highest dignitaries of the empire, realized that to disobey Kösem Sultan was to sign a death warrant. The reign of Kösem Sultan and the period of the Sultanate of women in general demonstrate that power in the Ottoman Empire was not concentrated exclusively in the hands of the sultans. The harem, traditionally perceived as a place of entertainment and seclusion for the ruler, was in fact an important political center where intrigues were woven, decisions were made, and the fate of the empire was decided. The women of the harem, especially the Valide Sultan, wielded considerable influence which they skillfully used to achieve their goals. However, even the most powerful woman in the empire could not rule forever. In 1651, Kösem Sultan fell victim to a palace coup. She was assassinated on the orders of her sister-in-law Turhan Sultan, the mother of Mehmed IV. Turhan, also a concubine of Greek origin like Kösem, had a strong character and ambition. She decided to get rid of her overly influential mother-in-law in order to rule the empire herself on behalf of her young son. The assassination of Kösem Sultan was a tragic end to the era of the Sultanate of women in the Ottoman Empire, although women continued to play an important role in the court. After a period of great conquests and stable rule, the Ottoman Empire gradually began to change. Sultans increasingly rarely personally ruled the state, preferring to indulge in palace entertainment or hunting. Real power was increasingly concentrated in the hands of the grand viziers, the first ministers of the empire. These people controlled all the most important spheres of state administration: finances, army, foreign policy, and internal order. It was they who decided what wars to wage, with whom to make alliances, who to appoint to high positions, and whom to execute. Sometimes the influence of the grand viziers was so great that the sultans became only nominal rulers, ceremonial figures whose role was reduced to approving the decisions made by the viziers. In periods of weakness of the sultan's power, the grand viziers could actually usurp power by removing the sultans from the government. It was the grand viziers who determined the political course of the empire, its domestic and foreign policies, its military campaigns, and economic development. One of the most prominent grand viziers in the history of the Ottoman Empire was Mehmed Köprülü. His name came to symbolize the reforms and revival of the empire in the mid-17th century. In 1656, when the Ottoman Empire was in deep crisis, Sultan Mehmed IV, the grandson of Kösem Sultan, offered the post of Grand Vizier to Köprülü, an experienced statesman known for his toughness, honesty, and intransigence. Köprülü agreed to accept the post, but set the Sultan a strict condition: complete freedom of action in the management of the state. The Sultan, desperate to find another person capable of leading the empire out of the crisis, was forced to give in. Köprülü was given carte blanche to carry out any reforms and take any measures he deemed necessary to restore order and strengthen the empire. Köprülü's first step was to restore order in the army. Janissary revolts and mutinies were the scourge of the 17th century Ottoman Empire. Köprülü dealt harshly with the rebellious Janissaries, restoring discipline and order in the army. Any attempts at rebellion were suppressed with extreme cruelty. Hundreds of rebels were executed and thousands more were sent to the remote provinces of the empire. Köprülü then set about fighting the corruption that was eating away at the empire's state apparatus. Dozens of officials found guilty of embezzlement and bribery were exiled or executed. Köprülü regained control of the central government over the provinces, restored tax collection, and replenished the emptied treasury. He introduced reforms in the financial and administrative systems, strengthening the state apparatus. Having strengthened the internal position of the empire, Köprülü began to regain lost territories and restore the military power of the Ottoman Empire. In 1669, after a long and bloody war, the Ottomans defeated the Republic of Venice and captured the island of Crete, ending the Crete War, which had lasted more than 20 years. it was an important victory that demonstrated the revival of the Ottoman Empire's military power. Mehmed Köprülü ruled with an iron hand, keeping the country from disintegration for 5 years and achieving military victories. His reforms laid the foundation for further strengthening of the Ottoman Empire under his son Fazıl Ahmed Köprülü, who inherited the post of Grand Vizier after his father's death. The Köprülü era was a period of relative stability and revival for the Ottoman Empire, although it could not prevent its further decline in the long term. However, not all Grand Viziers were as successful as Mehmed Köprülü. The history of the Ottoman Empire knows examples of failed viziers whose mistakes and miscalculations led to disastrous consequences for the state. One of the most famous examples of such failure was Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa, whose unsuccessful siege of Vienna in 1683 was a turning point in the history of the Ottoman Empire, marking the beginning of its decline in Europe. In the 17th century, the Ottoman Empire still retained considerable military power and ambitions in Europe. After the Köprülü reform period, the Ottomans again sought to expand their possessions to the west. Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa, an ambitious and self-confident politician, decided that the best way to consolidate Ottoman influence in Europe would be to conquer Vienna, the capital of the Holy Roman Empire and a key city that opened the way to Central Europe. In 1683, Kara Mustafa, at the head of a huge Ottoman army of over 150,000 men, marched on Vienna. After weeks of marching, the Ottomans surrounded the city and began a siege. Vienna's garrison was much smaller in number than the Ottoman army, and the city's fortifications were not the most modern. It seemed that Vienna was doomed to fall. Kara Mustafa, however, made a fatal mistake. Instead of an immediate assault, which could have brought quick success, he decided to take the city by force, counting on the defenders to exhaust themselves and surrender. This delay gave time for the Christian states to mobilize forces to help the besieged Vienna. While the Ottomans were laying siege, the Christian powers, realizing the seriousness of the threat, united to fight against a common enemy. The Austrians and Poles, with the support of other European states, assembled a substantial army. King John III Sobieski of Poland, a talented commander and resolute ruler, stood at the head of the Allied forces. When the Allied forces approached Vienna, Kara Mustafa still hoped to hold the siege and defeat the enemy. However, on September 12, 1683, the day of the decisive battle, the Allies attacked first. Polish cavalry, the famous winged hussars, descended on the Ottoman ranks, breaking through the defenses and causing panic in the ranks of the Ottoman army. As a result of the fierce battle, the Ottoman army was defeated head-on. Thousands of Ottoman soldiers died on the battlefield, and the remnants of the army fled in panic, abandoning their camp and siege artillery. The defeat at Vienna was a disaster for the Ottoman Empire. Until then, the Ottomans had been considered the main military force in Europe, instilling fear in the Christian states. Now, their westward expansion was halted, and the European powers went on the counteroffensive. The defeat at Vienna was a turning point that marked the beginning of the decline of the Ottoman Empire in Europe. After Kara Mustafa's return to Istanbul, he had to pay for his crushing defeat. Sultan Mehmed IV, angered by the loss of his army and the prestige of the empire, ordered the Grand Vizier's execution. Kara Mustafa was strangled with a silk cord, a traditional execution for high-ranking Ottoman officials, as an admonition to other viziers not to make similar mistakes. The defeat at Vienna had far-reaching consequences for the Ottoman Empire. European powers, encouraged by the victory, formed the Holy League and began a war to liberate the territories occupied by the Ottomans. During the Great Turkish War, 1683 to 1699, the Ottomans suffered a number of heavy defeats and were forced to cede significant territories, including Hungary and Transylvania. The Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699 fixed the territorial losses of the Ottoman Empire and marked the end of its dominance in Central Europe. The defeat at Vienna and subsequent territorial losses were a serious blow to Ottoman power. However, the war with Europe was only one side of the problem. While the Ottomans were losing ground in the Balkans and Central Europe, a new threat was looming from the north that would ultimately play a decisive role in the fate of the Ottoman Empire. This threat was Russia, a young and ambitious state that was rapidly gaining strength and seeking access to the southern seas. For centuries, the Ottoman Empire dominated the Black Sea region, controlling the important Crimean Peninsula and keeping Russian lands isolated from the southern seas. The Crimean Khanate, a vassal of the Ottoman Empire, served as an outpost of Ottoman influence in the region and constantly threatened Russia's southern borders. The Crimean Tatars made devastating raids on Russian lands, enslaving thousands of people and causing enormous damage to the economy. Until the end of the 17th century, Russia did not play a significant role in wars with the Ottoman Empire. Moscow's princes and Russian czars periodically clashed with the Crimean Khanate, but could not seriously challenge Ottoman power in the Black Sea region. The situation changed dramatically with the rise to power of Peter the Great, an energetic and far-sighted ruler who set Russia the goal of becoming a great European power and providing it with access to the southern seas. Peter the Great was well aware that the Ottoman Empire was the main obstacle to Russia's access to the Black Sea. Without control over the Black Sea, Russia remained cut off from world trade and could not fully develop as a maritime power. The Ottoman Navy and Crimean Tatars blockaded Russia's southern borders, hindering trade and threatening the country's security. In 1695 and 1696, Peter the Fur undertook the Azov campaigns, aimed at capturing the Turkish fortress of Azov at the mouth of the Don River, which opened access to the Sea of Azov and further to the Black Sea. The second campaign resulted in the capture of Azov, which was Russia's first major victory over the Ottoman Empire and marked the beginning of the struggle for the Black Sea region. At the beginning of the 18th century, Peter the Great continued his offensive to the south. In 1711, he undertook the Prut campaign, the purpose of which was to liberate Moldavia and Wallachia from Ottoman rule and further advance to the Black Sea. However, the campaign was unsuccessful. The Russian army was surrounded by the superior forces of the Ottomans on the Prut River and found itself in a critical situation. Peter the Furs had to agree to humiliating terms of peace to avoid total defeat. Under the Treaty of Prut, Russia returned Azov and other conquests in the south to the Ottoman Empire, temporarily abandoning its plans for access to the Black Sea. Despite the failure of the Prut campaign, Peter Fern did not give up his strategic goal. He realized that the struggle for the Black Sea region would be long and persistent, but necessary for Russia's future. In the following decades, Russia continued to strengthen its southern borders, build a fleet, and prepare for a new war with the Ottoman Empire. The decisive blow to the Ottoman positions in the Black Sea region was dealt already under Catherine II. Unlike Peter, who was only laying the groundwork for expansion, Catherine II not only challenged the Ottoman Empire, but also inflicted on it one of the heaviest defeats in history. As a result of the Russo-Turkish Wars of the second half of the 18th century, Russia finally established itself on the Black Sea and pushed the Ottoman Empire into the background. During the Russo-Turkish War of 1768 to 1774, Russian troops won a number of brilliant victories on land and at sea. The Russian fleet under the command of Admiral Grigory Spiridov defeated the Turkish fleet in the Battle of Chesmen, which became one of the most notorious naval victories of Russia. The Russian army under the command of Field Marshal Pyotr Rumyantsev captured key fortresses on the Danube and in the Crimea. In 1774, the Küçük-Kaynarca Peace Treaty was signed, under which the Ottoman Empire was forced to recognize the independence of the Crimean Khanate. This was a crushing blow to Ottoman influence in the region. Crimea, which had been a vassal of the Ottoman Empire for centuries, was now becoming an independent state that soon found itself in Russia's sphere of influence. In 1783, Russia finally annexed the Crimean Peninsula. The Crimean Tatars, weakened by internal conflicts and Russian pressure, were unable to organize serious resistance. The Russian army took Simferopol and other key Crimean cities without a fight. The annexation of Crimea to Russia symbolized the weakening of the Ottoman Empire and the strengthening of Russia in the Black Sea region. The loss of Crimea was a devastating blow to the Ottoman Empire. It lost control over the entire northern part of the Black Sea, lost an important strategic bridgehead, and suffered a huge damage to its prestige. For the Ottomans, the loss of Crimea was not just a military defeat, but a real challenge to their status as a great power. The Ottomans had always considered themselves the defenders of Islam, and the loss of Crimea, home to a large Muslim population, was a blow to the Sultan's religious authority as Caliph of the Muslims. In response to the annexation of Crimea to Russia, Sultan Abdulhamid I declared an eternal jihad against Russia, calling on all Muslims in the empire to fight for the return of Crimea and the liberation of co-religionists from the infidels. However, this declaration could no longer change the situation. The Ottoman Empire no longer had the military and economic power to stop Russian expansion. After the annexation of Crimea, Russia gained unimpeded access to the Black Sea, built new fortresses and naval bases, and its navy began to dominate the region. The Ottomans, having lost Crimea, finally went on the defensive, and their influence in Europe and the Balkans began to steadily decline. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, Russia continued to oust the Ottomans from their territories in the Black Sea region and the Balkans. During the Russo-Turkish Wars of 1787 to 1791 and 1806 to 1812, Russia annexed new territories, including Bessarabia and part of the Caucasus. The Ottoman Empire was increasingly losing its position, becoming the sick man of Europe, as European diplomats began to call it. The loss of Crimea symbolized the beginning of the long decline of the Ottoman Empire. By the early 19th century, the empire was no longer the formidable force that had once conquered entire countries and besieged Vienna. Its defeats in wars with Russia and European powers, internal problems, and economic decline signaled that the empire was no longer able to compete with the new strong states and needed deep reforms to survive in a changing world. In the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire entered a period of deep crisis that threatened its very existence. Military defeats, territorial losses, economic decline, internal rebellions, and the growing influence of European powers weakened the empire from within and without. Ottoman rulers were aware of the need for reform, but attempts at modernization faced resistance from conservative forces and could not stop the process of the empire's disintegration. European states were rapidly developing with the Industrial Revolution, powerful armies, and new technologies. In contrast, the Ottoman Empire remained a feudal power with an outdated economy and army. Its lagging behind Europe was becoming increasingly evident, and its survival was jeopardized. In the 19th century, the Ottoman sultans made a number of attempts at sweeping reforms known as Tanzimat. The Tanzimat reforms, initiated by Sultans Mahmud II and Abdul Majid I, were aimed at modernizing the Ottoman Empire along European lines. They included reforms of the army, tax, and judicial systems, the establishment of secular schools, the construction of railroads, and the development of industry. Laws became more equal for Muslims and non-Muslims, an important step toward the creation of a modern civil society. However, Tanzimat's reforms could not solve the main problem: the weakening of central authority and growing separatism in the provinces of the empire. Conservative forces, including the Janissaries, religious leaders, and the old Ottoman elite, resisted the reforms, fearing the loss of their privileges and traditional ways of life. Reforms were inconsistent and often sabotaged on the ground. At the same time, the provinces of the empire were increasingly out of Istanbul's control. National liberation movements in the Balkans, fueled by European powers, led to the secession of Greece, Serbia, Romania, and Bulgaria. Egypt effectively became independent under the rule of Muhammad Ali, formally remaining part of the Ottoman Empire but pursuing its own policies. In the Balkans and other regions of the empire, uprisings and riots constantly broke out. Russia continued to exert pressure on the Ottoman Empire, seeking to expand its influence in the Balkans and the Black Sea region. The Russo-Turkish Wars of the 19th century brought new territorial losses and humiliating peace treaties to the Ottoman Empire. The Russian Navy established full control over the Black Sea, and the Russian army advanced ever deeper into the Balkans. However, it was not only Russia that sought to divide the Ottoman lands. Britain and France, fearing the strengthening of Russia and seeking to expand their colonial possessions, also intervened in the Ottoman Empire, supporting separatist movements and using its weakness to their own advantage. The Crimean War of 1853 to 1856, in which Britain and France sided with the Ottoman Empire against Russia, demonstrated the complexity of the geopolitical situation around the sick man of Europe. By the end of the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire had become a semi-colonial power dependent on European powers. European countries controlled its economy, imposed their terms on the sultans, and interfered in domestic politics. Debts to European banks grew, and the Ottoman economy became increasingly dependent on the West. The empire was on the verge of collapse, and only skillful diplomacy and contradictions between European powers allowed it to temporarily preserve its existence. In the late 19th century, Sultan Abdul Hamid II, the last strong ruler of the Ottoman Empire, ascended the Ottoman throne. Having established a rigid authoritarian rule, Abdul Hamid II tried to stop the disintegration of the empire by pursuing a policy of pan-Islamism and strengthening central authority. He rolled back the liberal reforms of Tanzimat, suppressed opposition, established control over the press, and strengthened the role of Islam in government. Abdul Hamid II hoped that rallying the Muslim population around the Sultan as caliph would help keep the empire from disintegrating. He made extensive use of Islamic rhetoric and propaganda in an effort to mobilize the Muslim population of the empire to fight for its preservation. At the same time, he continued to implement limited reforms in the military and economy, seeking to modernize the empire without affecting the foundations of the traditional way of life. Under Abdul Hamid II, the construction of railroads began, linking Istanbul with the outlying provinces of the empire, including the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. Railroad construction was important economically and strategically, facilitating trade and strengthening the central government's control over the regions. However, despite the best efforts of Abdul Hamid II, it was no longer possible to stop the collapse of the empire. National liberation movements in the Balkans and the Arab provinces continued. European powers increasingly interfered in the internal affairs of the Ottomans, and discontent with the Sultan's dictatorship matured in the state itself. In the early 20th century, the Young Turk movement emerged in the Ottoman Empire, uniting officers, intellectuals, and liberal-minded politicians who advocated modernization and democratic reforms. The Young Turks criticized the authoritarian regime of Abdul Hamid II, demanded the restoration of the constitution and radical reforms to save the empire. In 1908, the Young Turks revolted and forced Abdul Hamid II to return the 1876 constitution, which he had previously abolished. In 1909, Abdul Hamid II was overthrown, and his brother Mehmed V, effectively a puppet in the hands of the Young Turks, ascended the throne. The Young Turk Revolution marked the end of the authoritarian regime of Abdul Hamid II and the beginning of a new phase in the history of the Ottoman Empire, which, however, could not prevent its final disintegration. At the beginning of the 20th century, the Ottoman Empire was in a state of deep crisis and political instability. The Young Turks, who came to power after the 1908 revolution, tried to reform and modernize the country, but faced internal problems, national conflicts, and external pressure from European powers. When World War I broke out in 1914, the Ottoman Empire faced a fateful choice. Despite its internal contradictions and weakness, the Young Turk government, led by Enver Pasha, decided to enter the war on the side of Germany and Austria-Hungary, hoping that an alliance with the strong powers would help the empire regain lost territories and restore its former greatness. The Ottoman Empire's entry into World War I was a suicidal step for it. The Ottoman army was insufficiently prepared for modern warfare, the economy was weak, and internal contradictions only intensified under wartime conditions. The war led to the depletion of the empire's resources, mass casualties, and the final disintegration of the state. Throughout World War I, the Ottoman Empire fought on several fronts, against Russia in the Caucasus, against Britain and France in the Middle East, and in the Dardanelles. The Ottoman army suffered defeats on all fronts, with the exception of the Dardanelles campaign of 1915, where it managed to repel an Allied offensive and win a tactical victory. The Caucasus front became a real disaster for the Ottomans. The unsuccessful offensive of Enver Pasha in the winter of 1914 to 1915 led to the defeat of the Ottoman army at Sarikamish and the death of tens of thousands of soldiers. Later, the Russian army advanced deep into the Ottoman Empire, occupying Erzurum, Trabzon, and other important cities. In the Middle East, British forces gradually advanced from Egypt and Mesopotamia, capturing Palestine, Syria, and Iraq. The Arab population of the empire, incited by British propaganda and promises of independence, revolted against Ottoman rule. Arab nationalism was an important factor that weakened the Ottoman Empire during the war years. In 1918, after a series of heavy defeats and the withdrawal of its allies from the war, the Ottoman Empire was forced to sign the Armistice of Mudros, signifying its surrender. After the end of the war, the territory of the Ottoman Empire was occupied by Entente troops, and its lands were divided among the victors. The 1920 Treaty of Sèvres fixed the partition of the Ottoman Empire. Turkey lost a significant part of its territory, including the Arab provinces, eastern Thrace, Izmir, and other regions. The Sultanate was abolished and Turkey's territory came under Allied control. However, the Turkish people did not accept the partition of the country. Under the leadership of Mustafa Kemal, the hero of the Dardanelles campaign, a national liberation movement began, which launched a struggle for Turkish independence. During the Turkish War of Independence, 1919 to 1922, the Turkish army under the command of Mustafa Kemal won victories over the Greek and Armenian troops, as well as over the Entente forces. In 1923, the Treaty of Lausanne was signed, replacing the Treaty of Sèvres and fixing Turkey's new borders. Turkey retained Anatolia, eastern Thrace, and Istanbul, but lost all Arab provinces and other territories provided for in the Treaty of Sèvres. In the same year, the Republic of Turkey was proclaimed, and its first president was Mustafa Kemal, who was later named Ataturk, father of the Turks. The proclamation of the Republic of Turkey in 1923 marked the end of the Ottoman Empire and the beginning of a new era in Turkish history. Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, the founder and first president of the Republic of Turkey, introduced radical reforms to modernize the country and turn it into a secular nation-state. Ataturk abolished the caliphate, abolished Sharia courts, introduced secular education, replaced the Arabic alphabet with the Latin alphabet, gave women equal rights with men, carried out economic reforms and other changes aimed at westernizing Turkey. Ataturk's reforms changed the face of Turkey from a backward agrarian country to a modern secular state. However, despite radical reforms and a break with the Ottoman past, the legacy of the Ottoman Empire continued to live on in modern Turkey. Ottoman traditions, culture, architecture, cuisine, music, and other elements of Ottoman heritage are still part of Turkish identity. Turkey, although it became a republic, has not been able to completely rid itself of its Ottoman past, which continues to influence its culture, society, and politics. The Ottoman Empire, which existed for more than 6 centuries, left an indelible mark on the history of the world. It was one of the greatest empires in history, playing an important role in world politics, economy, and culture. The Ottoman legacy extends far beyond the borders of modern Turkey, encompassing the Balkans, the Middle East, North Africa, and other regions that were once part of the empire. The history of the Ottoman Empire is an important part of world history and continues to attract the attention of historians, political scientists, and cultural scholars around the world.